The brain is a wonderful and mysterious organ. It works very hard as the control center for our bodies. The brain tells our eyes to blink, our mouths to speak, and our feet to dance. Our brains help us pay attention in math class and helps us go to sleep at night. Did you know that each of our brains look and work a little bit differently from one another? Some of these brain differences are normal, but sometimes there are problems in the brain that can make us very sick. But if our brains are inside our heads, how can we look at the brain? Luckily, scientists and engineers have invented machines that let us see what our brains look like and how they're working inside. There are many different types of brain imaging machines, but today we're going to talk about one called EEG. Our brains are made up of brain cells called neurons that connect to each other in networks and patterns. The neurons in our brain work together to help our brain function properly. But how do these neurons communicate with each other? Well, the answer is electricity. Scientists are able to measure the electrical activity in our brains using EEGs. Normal electrical activity in the brain creates a certain pattern of brain waves that is easy for scientists to recognize. Sometimes there are weird patterns in the brain waves that might show a problem with the brain. For example, we can use EEGs to see when someone is having a seizure. So how does EEG work? To record the brain's electrical activity, we use small metal discs with thin wires that are called electrodes. These electrodes are placed on the scalp and the wires are plugged into an amplifier that sends signals to a computer. And this computer records the EEG results. Other than the electrodes that record brain waves from the head, we also need to put electrodes around the eyes. These eye electrodes will measure blinks and eye movements. We need to use a special type of gel to attach our electrodes. This gel has salt in it and it acts as a conductor, which means that it helps the electricity move from the brain to the electrode. Without this gel, there would be too much impedance, which means that the electrodes would have a lot of trouble recording the electrical activity from the brain. We have to make sure to gently clean and scrub each electrode site with gel before we begin to record our EEG. We can see how well each of our electrodes is connected by checking the resistance of each site. When we see that all the sites are blue, we know that we're ready to start recording the brain waves. One way that we're able to look at the brain's electrical activity is by seeing the wave patterns when someone is resting. We can ask them to sit very still with their eyes open while we record the EEG. It's very important that the person doesn't move because this will make the EEG recording very messy. If the recordings are messy, this means we won't be able to read the results properly and we won't be able to see how the brain is working. When we look at EEG results after we record them, we can see that there are different types of brainwave patterns. These patterns are made up of different frequencies, and these frequencies are given off by the brain depending on how alert it is. A brainwave pattern made up of delta frequencies tells us that the person is probably in a deep sleep. Someone who is awake and alert will have a brainwave pattern that is mainly showing the beta frequency. If the brain is showing a lot of the alpha frequency, then that person is probably awake but very relaxed. The theta frequency is seen when someone is starting to fall asleep and is feeling very drowsy. We can also use EEG to see how the brain responds to things it sees or sounds that it hears in the environment. We can see how good the brain is at listening and paying attention, or how quickly the brain turns its attention to a new sound. Here's an example of how we can test this using EEG. Using headphones, we can play sounds for someone that get repeated over and over until the person's brain gets used to hearing it. Then, when the person isn't expecting it, we can play a surprise sound like a dog barking or a horn honking. This new sound will catch the brain off guard to capture its attention. When this happens, the brain will produce a response that we can see on the EEG as a big waveform. We can measure how big the wave is to see how well the brain is working to give its attention to new sounds. These are just a few of the many different ways that scientists can use EEG recordings to examine brainwave patterns. EEG is a safe and easy to use tool that gives scientists a wonderful window into the fascinating inner workings of our brains.